leaders from different sectors, from business, from labor, from government, have to have a forum where they can pool their resources, figure out how to tackle problems together. And that's something we've gotten less good at over the years.
Welcome to The Lift, the show about leadership, growth, and getting what we want. I'm your host, Ben Brooks. For over a decade, I've worked with CEOs, their executive teams, HR departments, and entrepreneurs to identify what drives their success and what holds them back. And now I'm excited to share those insights with you. On The Lift, we pull up to see the bigger picture from accomplished leaders who know how to get things done in a rapidly changing world. We've got all of that and a lot more coming up next on The Lift. Oftentimes when we think about leadership, we think about running an organization. But what if your job in leadership was to get organizations to cooperate and partner? Today's guest has spent years doing that in one of the most difficult and opinionated places on earth, New York City. Kathryn Wylde was the longtime president and CEO of the Partnership for New York City. She's brought together union leaders, nonprofits, business, and government to get around the table, to find shared interests, to respect and trust each other, and ultimately to make real progress. She's often described as the billionaire whisperer, someone who can get both billionaires and policymakers in the same room and keep them there long enough to actually get something done. As we were designing and building the Lift podcast, I put together a short list of dream guests, folks that I'd long admired and thought that maybe one day we could get on the show. Kathryn was on that list, and I am thrilled that she is joining with us to tell us about what it takes to get people to get along and get things done in a place as diverse, dynamic, and loud as New York City. Kathryn Wylde, welcome to the Lift podcast.
Thank you.
I'm delighted that you're here, and our listenership is from all over the country and the world. And having lived in New York for 19 years now myself, there's a lot of inside things about New York that people don't understand if you don't live in New York. I was wondering if we could open up by you giving people a sense of maybe some of the misunderstood aspects of what New York is or how it works.
Well, I think that it's important to know that New York is a magnet for talent from around the world, and that's really been the case for years. It's a place where people feel they can express themselves, that they can realize their dreams, even though it's not home ownership, because we have the lowest rate of home ownership in the country at only 32%. So that does distinguish New York. So we have a city that is basically wide open, and we have a history from the beginning. The Dutch merchants that came here basically founded New York as a place for business. And that meant we weren't going to worry about your religion. We weren't going to worry about what country you came from or what language you spoke. It was all about what can you accomplish? And that's kind of the ethos that's driven New York, an ethos of pragmatism, of tolerance, and of stick to business.
This still seems to be, one of the great commerce capitals of the world for 400 years. What's the staying power?
Well, I think, again, it's the attraction to talent. It's been the first stop for immigrants originally from Europe, but from around the world. Immigrants kind of tended to make their first stop here on Ellis Island in New York City. And as a result, we're a place that has been diversified. Our public schools have 180 languages spoken in them. We are a very diverse community, and one of our former mayors said, we're not a melting pot, we're a gorgeous mosaic. And the point is that you can travel the world in New York City.
Yes.
Every kind of restaurant, every language spoken, every religion practiced. And I think that's what makes it special. I came here, I grew up in what I call the homogenized Midwest.
Okay.
And I came here and was overwhelmed by every day you were learning something, seeing something you'd never seen before. It's as if you were a world traveler right here in the 5 boroughs.
You grew up in Wisconsin and went to school in Minnesota. Did you know that New York was going to be in your future?
The summer after my freshman year in college, I had a boyfriend who got an internship at the United Nations. And so I found myself a summer internship with Lutheran Social Services in a church basement in Brooklyn. I had no idea, except for I did reach out. In the 8th grade, we were asked to find someone we emulated that we wanted to be when we grew up.
Okay.
And I wrote to a woman named Pauline Frederick, who was the UN correspondent. I listened to her on the radio, which is the reason I wrote to her, because she was a woman talking about international news. And that was very unusual when I was growing up 70 years ago in Wisconsin.
So you come to New York and you're in the basement of a Brooklyn hospital.
I came through the Minnesota Lutheran Church, the American Lutheran Church, and I got my first job at that hospital in an area that had recently been designated a federal poverty area. This was 1968, and it was the time that the American urban crisis was really at its peak. Through a combination of the civil rights movement, the anti-poverty movement, and the biggest factor was it was the Industrial Revolution, where we were going from manufacturing economy to a service economy. And that happened over the course of less than a decade. And in the process, we lost our blue-collar jobs. And this was the day when blue-collar meant middle class.
Middle class, yeah. Yep. You
It
could
was
buy a house, you could take care of
exactly,
family. Yes.
Exactly. And so we lost in 5 years, in the early 70s, we lost more than 1 million people that moved out of the city because they had lost their jobs. We lost half our Fortune 500 companies. We absolutely imploded as an economy in a city. And then in 1975, the city went bankrupt as a result and had to be bailed out. Interesting enough, and what, again, special about New York, is the bailout was a combination of the governor, at the time Hugh Carey, partnered with the banks, David Rockefeller at Chase Bank, Walter Wriston at Citibank, et cetera. And they all partnered with organized labor, with the unions. The union leaders were totally at the table because the only way to save the city was a combination of the unions, the public sector unions, taking less in salaries, allowing for layoffs, allowing for the downsizing of city government because the city had no money, and the banks generating debt. The unions also put their pension funds up to bail out the city. So it was a public-private partnership in the best sense, and it was business, labor, and government working together in a way that honestly was unique to New York. Mm-hmm. It's part of the secret sauce of the city, is that there's an ability to overlook stereotypes, to overlook political differences, and say, let's just get stuff done.
You know, you started out early as an activist in a certain way, protesting and sitting in at a HUD facility. Was that right? At
yes.
26 Federal Plaza?
Yes, we took it over.
Give us a sense, what time was this and why were you there and what were you trying to achieve?
This was about 1972, and the neighborhoods in the city were suffering from fires burning down. I was working in a hospital. I was on the front line in the emergency room when the victims of fire were coming in, and there's nothing more devastating. What came out in the press was that the fires in our neighborhood, we had attached homes, and the fires were starting in buildings that were abandoned because of fraud that was taking place with the federal government. FHA mortgages, houses that were sold by brokers, resold to people who weren't really eligible, false credit ratings. And as a result, the housing stock deteriorated very rapidly. When fire started in one row house, it would run through the block. And so it was a life and death situation. And we saw the guys from the federal government going off in handcuffs for having been the source of this. And we wanted the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development to give those buildings that they had taken from mortgage foreclosure, give those buildings back to the community, let us rehab them and make our neighborhood safe again. So it was a good cause. We got it done. We didn't leave that day until we had signed by the HUD administrator the commitment to turn the buildings over to a nonprofit group in the community. And over the years, both my husband and I staffed that nonprofit.
And ultimately, it produced many quality units of housing.
We did over 1,000 units of housing and basically committed that housing to permanent affordability. So unlike other neighborhoods in Brooklyn that gentrified very rapidly when there was a change in population, when Brooklyn became an in place to be,
sure.
Sunset Park that community remained a place that was affordable to a mixed income population.
You took over the place and you protested, but you weren't just outraged. You had an ask.
Absolutely. And this is different than things today. We tend to have political protests. Our protests were not political, not partisan. It wasn't Republicans, Democrats, MAGA, DSA, whatever.
Sure.
Back then, actually, we had a better shot because government was broke. And so the nonprofit community and the neighborhoods basically had to organize to solve their own problems, whether it was crime or housing, or I was working for a hospital, so healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And neighborhoods organized with their local institutions, their churches, all for the purpose not of making a political statement, but of fixing what was broke.
Who were you trying to get the attention of? And then ultimately, what was the thing that you walked out with that they had agreed to?
Press always helps.
Yep.
But it was getting the attention of all those in charge in the government. Ultimately, it required getting the banks. I ended up going to work briefly for a savings bank, which at the time held a lot of the mortgages in the neighborhoods, and were willing to turn those mortgages over to the nonprofit. So it was putting together a systemic approach to stopping the devastation of the communities, the fires, the abandonment, and stabilizing. And then it was mostly the federal government coming in with resources, with programs that would allow us to get financing. And again, it was always a mix of public and private financing, cooperation between the public and private sectors. I worry today that people are waiting for government to fix things. Our Mayor Mamdani, ran on an affordability agenda. We have to make the city more affordable. And what I've tried to convince him of is that doesn't mean government spending more money, because ultimately we're all paying for that.
Sure.
It means thinking about how we can work together to improve things.
I would imagine, especially being in some ways a pioneer, as a woman in some of these roles and places and spaces you're in, did you have to adjust personally your style or how you interpreted, a lot of maybe strong and gruff men or just different cultures? Because it's a lot different how people do things here. How did that affect you in your formative years?
Well, I have always been a very direct person.
Okay.
So I fit in and I was very comfortable. I didn't want to be in a place where people tell you what you want to hear rather than what they mean.
Mm-hmm.
So I loved New York and the New York culture. And, companies bring young people here for their first experience because New York is the most productive labor force, any place in the world, really. And it's largely that directness and the ability to get folks to not take it personally, but to say, we've got to tell each other the truth as we see it, figure out where there are opportunities for compromise between we all have different views often.
Yep.
And I found that a wonderful environment for working and living.
For people that are in management leadership positions, how does it work that causes this productivity? Or the alternative, without the directness, what's the consequence of that?
One, it takes a lot longer to get anything done because you have to slower. You have to figure out what everybody really means. Two, you're not able to really take the essence of various points of view and try and synthesize them quickly. I think that's really important to having a productive work culture. You can still be sensitive to people's feelings. I don't think conflict has to be nasty, but it's being able to put forward your ideas. I know when I used to preference everything I said by saying, I think this, rather than this is the fact. Right? And I think that increasingly women are better at being direct, and that creates, again, a better work culture.
So you had this, activism where you would get the attention, but then you had a strategy and people had to work together and there was an ask. There's a lot of cleverness behind a lot of that, what I'm hearing, that bringing the housing together, or what happened after the city went bankrupt and turning things around, or even, I'm sure, after 9/11 or the pandemic or the great financial crisis. You've seen a lot of different chapters here. Mm-hmm. Is that pattern that sort of in crisis people can come together, but are people only coming together when their back's against the wall?
Well, I hope not, but that does tend to be how things work.
To galvanize folks.
To galvanize. But I think, again, in New York, most of the successful businesses, employers understand that they need an environment where they have a diverse team and everybody is willing to speak their point of view, speak their mind. I really think that that's what's special about New York and why we've been so successful, both in the corporate environment and increasingly with the innovation economy, the entrepreneurial environment, that we've got many more entrepreneurs. We have 294,000 businesses in New York City.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
I'm happy to own two of them. And so that's maybe a third, but that's incredible. I mean, you think about just as a ratio of the number of people, that's got to be incredibly high.
Absolutely. And about half of them are first generation immigrants. So we've got a diversity of business talent from around the world, and obviously professional talent as well. Honestly, the biggest threat to us right now is the potential for, and the fact that we've cut off a lot of immigration to this country. And there's nothing that will damage the New York economy and the American economy more than not attracting the best world talent to our country and giving them the opportunity.
Well, what was your advice when you worked with our new mayor? What was your leadership advice for him?
Well, I wanted to partner with him because he was the positive candidate running for mayor in the general election. He wanted to make our city more open, more affordable, better. He didn't run a negative campaign. He ran a positive campaign. And I thought that was really important. And he brought out in the primary 170,000 first-time young people voters.
Incredible. Yeah.
He engaged young people in our democracy, which we've failed miserably at in recent years. We've had fewer than 20% of the population voting in our local elections, and he was able to energize that population. So I support positive leadership, and my counsel to him was broaden your coalition, govern from pragmatism, not ideology. But in general, I think he wants to build a broad coalition. He wants to represent everyone, and I think he's working hard to do that.
AI is changing things. Immigration is a factor. There's obviously less global cooperation at the moment. Are there other things threatening New York? I mean, the mayor you helped as a part of his transition around the kind of economic task force. Do you agree around the affordability, not the way to solve it with government, but that it is an issue for New Yorkers?
I think affordability is the number one issue in this country. It has created financial insecurity among the large majority of Americans, particularly now, tragically, college students.
Yes, young people.
Where are they going to get a job? I was talking to a large professional management firm last week that described to me how up until 5 years ago, every year they were recruiting thousands of college graduates to New York City to enter their business for jobs. And that this year they recruited 10.
What? Wow. Orders of magnitude
Orders
less.
of magnitude that are, and some of this is AI, but a lot of this is just cutting back because affordability affects business as well as it affects individuals. But New York, unfortunately, over the last 15 years, New York has become one of the top 5 most expensive cities in the world in terms of cost of living and cost of doing business. Mayor Mamdani was elected on that agenda. And I think it's a mistake to think you fix the affordability crisis by raising taxes so you can subsidize people's lives. We just can't afford to do that, particularly if the federal government is not leading the way, since they're the only ones that can print money.
Sure.
For state and local government to try and fix that problem is very difficult. So affordability has to be dealt with in a different way. That's something that I'm working on right now, is to take, for example, insurance costs. Governor Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, is very courageously leading an effort to try and bring down insurance costs, starting with car insurance. Our car insurance costs in New York are 52% higher than the country. We have a huge increase in staged car accidents.
Whoa.
It's 90% of the fraud reported to the State Department of Financial Services are staged accidents where both doctors and trial lawyers are in collusion. That's an affordability crisis that we can fix. We just have to change the laws. And so what we've got to look for are the hard things in affordability.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to happen by simply reducing the cost of housing by providing a subsidy or reducing the cost of childcare by providing a subsidy. Affordability was the right issue for our new mayor to tackle. And I'm very hopeful that he's going to do a good job on figuring out all the hard things and the hard choices you have to make if you're really going to tackle that issue.
How do you get people to think like that? Because that requires a lot more thoughtfulness, a lot more sophistication, a better understanding of the problem.
I know you focus on leadership.
Mm-hmm.
This is where leadership comes in. And leaders from different sectors, from business, from labor, from government, have to have a forum where they can pool their resources, figure out how to tackle problems together. And that's something we've gotten less good at over the years. We all kind of hunker down and go to our corners.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not coming together. There are very few places that provide a forum for taking off your industry hat, your political hat,
your own self-interest or your
own
point
self-interest.
of view. Okay.
Take that off and sit down and have the conversation, draw on the resources of all parties to figure out, just like we solved the fiscal crisis in the 1970s,
Mm-hmm.
business, labor, the biggest bankers coming together. And that's a civic exercise that, again, for cities to remain strong, for the country to remain strong, we have to get that muscle back.
And it takes a lot of discipline and patience, right? Because
absolutely,
these forums, I mean, the partnership, that you would bring people in that were on very different parts of the economy and their points of union and nonprofit and investment bankers. When you would call these folks in together or be in these spaces, how did you get people to take off their sort of badge and actually listen? Because the goal was not to ever get everyone to agree, but more to align, right? Everyone's got to compromise a little bit. It's not going to be exactly what we want, but you had to have a willingness to hear people who had wildly different points of view come to the table and work something out, which actually getting people to do anything together is freaking hard on a team, let alone people that aren't on the same team.
I think coming in with facts that surprised them.
Okay.
So whenever we were taking on something tough, and I'll give you an example, 20 years ago, the subway system was broke, needed new financing from a variety of sectors. So we went over and saw in Sweden, they were implementing congestion pricing, where they were charging vehicles that were coming into the central business district a congestion fee. And part of that was to raise money for the transportation system. Part of it was to reduce air pollution and car pollution. Part of that was to make a more efficient city so cars could move around. So I came back from that, and we got an economist to do a first time ever study of what is the cost of excess traffic and who pays it. And what we found out was, when we did the study originally in 2013, it was $13 billion a year. And most of it was paid by employers for overtime, for fuel, for delays in delivery, for being stuck in traffic, and the economy as a whole. So we were able to convince the employers to become the primary advocates for congestion pricing, where they were going to pay. But we could show them by the time it passed in 2017, we could show them that it was $20 billion a year they would be saving. So you give the facts from credible sources, not biased sources. Credible sources, you do the study, you have everybody have an aha moment. We have an opportunity to do things differently and fix this problem, and everybody wins.
So you get them excited about the possibility, but also you'd size the problem in a manner that they cared about.
That's right. You quantify the problem and you quantify the benefits to them.
That was a pretty big roller coaster to get done. And even the governor, who I know you have a close relationship with, had kind of pulled support around an election and then came back. And I understand some of the puts and takes on that, but it's under attack by the federal government. And so even when you get folks to align, which sounds like it took 20 years. I know that Mayor Bloomberg was an advocate, but it wasn't, he was
ultimately.
But at first he wasn't.
Not at first.
Right? So you had all these people that kind of came along, and then here we've only had it in place here a year or so, or a year or two. And yet there's desire to kind of pull it back or have it go away. How do you make these coalitions and the change stick?
Well, the court, Judge Lyman, ruled once again that the federal government cannot shut down our congestion pricing system. And the resistance is coming primarily from the federal government at this point. So it's the law in New York. The courts have affirmed that. So we're good to go on congestion pricing. But that's only one of many, many examples where we've had to have everybody think about issues in a different way. And that's what makes it possible to have great world cities, because we're such dense environments. We face such big challenges, fiscal, economic, social, and we have to figure out solutions, and we have to do that together. So in 2019, the governor and mayor, one of the few things that Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio agreed upon was that we wanted to win the headquarters of Amazon. And Amazon ran a bake-off among cities.
500 submitted or something, all over. It was ridiculous in a certain way. Yeah.
An unprecedented and very arrogant thing for a company to do. Cities compete for us rather than...
Yes.
They organized this bake-off, and they signed a confidentiality agreement with Amazon at their behest that they wouldn't divulge any of the terms of the deal.
The tax incentives and the land
the
given.
Location and you can't do publicly subsidized development in secret.
Yeah, it's the people's assets, right?
Exactly.
It's the taxpayers.
Exactly. It was a terrible mistake to agree to those terms. And ultimately, we won the battle, the governor and the mayor were able to force the approvals through.
Or to have the bid get out there.
Well, and to approve the terms of the subsidy. But Amazon got cold feet because you had senators from Washington, which is where they really cared about in terms of their legislative political interests, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, et cetera, were up here screaming in defense of the community. And this is the same time that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was elected from that district. So it blew up. Again, process matters. And I think good leaders understand that and don't, particularly on public-private deals, they don't try and force their will or get their way. They try and make a case that people will understand and at the same time listen to what the concerns are. In the case of Amazon, the neighbors were saying, sure, this will produce great jobs, but my kids won't be qualified for them. They don't have college degrees. They're not trained. They ended up in Virginia. They could have offered the same program the University of Virginia offered, which is a massive tech training program to train employees for Amazon from the community. They never got there. So these challenges, people take them as sort of one-off political challenges. They're not. They're a way of thinking, doing business, having a process that has credibility, having messengers with credibility. And that was what was missing, and that's why we lost Amazon.
And so overall, the what and the why, let's get 25,000 jobs in at one of the fastest growing and most successful companies and high quality jobs and revitalize Long Island City in some areas. The what and the why made a lot of sense, but it was the how and the approach of using force versus power and doing it sort of in secrecy that
top down secrecy.
Didn't work.
Yeah, did not work.
And so if people are listening to this today where they think, gosh, if we could get a couple of these groups at the table for an issue that they care about in their community or in their industry, et cetera, what's the advice that you have that you've learned along the way? Because you have a respect for billionaires that you've talked about openly, and you've been a community activist, and you've seen sort of the full arc. What is the advice you'd have to even set that table, to create that forum, or what kind of leader do they need to be to get the different voices at the table and to have the process work? Because I think everyone talks about a process, but processes are driven by people. So what kind of people do we need to drive those kind of processes?
Well, again, I think we need leaders in various sectors who can transcend their own interests, who are listeners. And then you have to give it time. And you have to put people around the table that on all the big issues that I've worked on, whether it was recovery from the pandemic or getting through the pandemic, actually, or getting through 9/11 and recovery from that, on all the big issues, it has depended on developing or building on trust among leaders from different sectors who represented the diverse whole that is the city. And taking the time, and this is a leadership exercise, taking the time that's needed to understand the various points of view and come to a conclusion that works for everyone. That takes another quality that I think is really important in leaders, which is empathy. And you have to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. You have to be able to hear their point of view as a reality for them. And you have to figure out, how can you reconcile that? My career has basically been, whether it was from representing the community or representing the billionaires, my career has been trying to find the individuals and the forum, or create the forum where they could hear each other.
David Rockefeller was quite influential on your leadership style and what you saw.
Absolutely.
Were there things that he did or others leaders that you think are kind of role models that we can all learn from? Mayor Bloomberg, was one of those as well that was quite formative for how you saw how leadership could be done.
The first quality in terms of David Rockefeller, he was humble. He was not somebody that thought money went with intelligence necessarily. I mean,
Sure.
he was a very smart man. He was the first person I heard who understood that great world cities were the essential platform for business in a globalizing economy. And this is back in the 70s. He got that. So they were humble. They were respectful of people from all walks of life. They were inclusive because they thought that was the only thing that made sense.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't think it made sense for one group, one sector, one type to be dictating
How things are.
What's
your counsel to people that might be really passionate or fired up about things in the world right now, and kind of what they need to do with themselves to be the kind of leader that can show up and create those environments for others?
Well, I think when people are angry, they make other people defensive or try and put other people on the defensive.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no faster way to a roadblock for anything getting done than defensiveness, because it's a negative, not a positive.
It's a restraining force. Things stop.
So I think they have to temper their frustration, their anger. I mean, that's the key. You can know you disagree with someone wildly, but if you can just think about that, putting them on the defensive, arguing directly with them, challenging them is never going to have a good outcome. And that's just a brute strength argument. You know, the justice is the interest of the stronger.
Well, my last question is around paying it forward. You know, if you were to give people your best advice about managing, leading, and dealing with people, what do you want to leave them with?
I think listening and hearing the other person's point of view. I think that's the way you make progress when there are tough challenges, when there are difficult disagreements. I think you have to, on both sides, but I think for leaders in particular, they really have to get a sense of what's motivating someone, because otherwise you can't find the common denominator. We both agree there's a problem. How do we get to agreement on how to solve the problem? That's how I've worked over the years. And the most successful leaders I've seen, that's how they work. They don't start by pontificating their point of view. They start by gathering feedback from others, trying to find common denominator, areas of interest, agreement. And that's possible with almost anyone if you take the time.
Well said. I learned in sales training, he or she who says the least makes the most. So very aligned. Well, Kathryn, thank you for coming to The Lift. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Ben.
All right, everyone, let's turn today's episode into action. Kathryn may be working with difficult billionaires, but her lessons from today's episode can help us influence almost anyone in our everyday lives. First, if you're dealing with a complex issue and need stakeholders to care, quantify the problem in terms they will care about. Ask yourself what this problem costs the person across the table, and then find credible data to show them. Second, come with a concrete ask, not just outrage. Pair every escalation with a specific request. Pressure may get you attention, but a specific ask will get you results. And maybe most importantly, lead with listening. As Kathryn says, there's no faster way to a roadblock than defensiveness. The most effective leaders don't open by stating their view or what they want. They start by understanding what's driving the other person. You just can't find common ground if you aren't listening. Thanks for joining me this week on The Lift. For more info on what you heard in today's episode, visit our show notes. You can find out more about the show at theliftpod.com. If listening to The Lift today was a good use of your time, please share it with a colleague, a friend, I don't know, your ex, your mother, anyone. Don't let good advice die with you. And for those of you who like to earn a little bit of extra credit, leave a comment on Spotify. We'd love to hear from you. The Lift is produced and edited by the team at Edit Audio. This episode was produced by Victoria Marin and edited by Ali Sirwa. Our production manager is Kathleen Speckert. Our executive producer is Steph Colburn. A special thanks to Corey Rich and Beth Gatzik.